Hi, I'm Phil Robb, co-founder of Turtle Rock Studios and creative director on Evolve, and you're watching Eurogamer.
Heyo, Ian from Eurogamer here, and in this video I'll be talking monsters with Phil Robb from Turtle Rock Studios, the makers of the 4v1 monster hunting game Evolve. So Rob, Evolve will have 3 monsters available on launch, the Goliath, the Kraken, and one as yet unannounced beastie. Did Turtle Rock Studios always plan to have 3 monsters, or did they play around with that number and find that 3 was the sweet spot?
We actually had a lot of ideas for different monsters, and as it turns out, monsters are incredibly big undertaking. They're very complex. They're very expensive. So at the end of the day, we sort of had to play this nice little balancing act between value for the consumer, put as many monsters as we could possibly get in there, and make sure that felt good. But obviously, we didn't have enough time or resources really to do all of the monsters we wanted to do. So we've got those guys just sort of set aside. Certainly, probably those monsters will make an appearance in DLC and stuff like that.
You guys recently released concept art of an unused monster, the Velvet Worm. Can you talk a little about the Velvet Worm and why you chose not to include it in the game?
Well, from a technical standpoint, getting something that can kind of slither along the ground and sort of go around all the objects, that requires technology that we just didn't have, right? Velvet Worm would have been really cool. But one of the things about the monsters is we really like for the monsters to have kind of a human element to them, and have some intelligence and relatability, so to speak. So that when you're playing that monster, you can kind of sympathize with them. And there's some empathy there. It's kind of hard to do that with a worm. But yeah, the idea behind him was that he was going to be a burrowing creature and kind of a stealth predator. But at the end of the day, it's like we have to look at what we can accomplish with the technology we have, and he was one of those ones where it's like, well, maybe someday, but not for this one. Well, that's not to say that we won't take elements from Velvet Worm and incorporate them into other monsters. That's one of the things. Every idea that we have, there's always something worth keeping. Even if we can't do the sort of slithery thing. Some of the powers that he had were actually really good and probably will, make an appearance in later monsters.
Fun! So, how do you go about designing the monsters? What's the process, and how many iterations of the Goliath and Kraken were created before the ones we see today?
The design process that we use on the monsters is sort of a smaller version of the design process we use, on the overall game, which is, on everything that we do, it's all about rapid prototype, get it up and running as quickly as possible. It doesn't have to be pretty. It's usually pretty dirty and ugly looking, but and then play it and test it, right? And so that's what we did with all of our monsters as well. With Goliath was probably took us the longest. He was our first monster, so he was sort of our guinea pig, right? He was the guy that we essentially were learning on as we went. I think he went through at least 4 visual iterations. Some of his like Flame Breath, for example, is one of the ones that has sort of been with him through all the iterations. But then there were other ones like we had the first version of Goliath was actually called Scorpion. He was kind of like a crab-like crustacean monster. And he could like grab people and things like that. And Goliath, we ended up choosing different abilities for him that we felt worked better for gameplay. So yeah, Goliath was a long time coming. And then we went from Goliath, we went into Kraken. Kraken came a lot more easy. I think we had 2 visual iterations on the Kraken, and then And as far as his abilities go, we always had a pretty good idea of what we wanted him to do. We wanted him to, he had sort of an electrical theme, which, sort of led us down these visual pathways of, electric eels, which sort of led us into sea creatures, which led us into Cthulhu, and all those great references.
I got you back!
Good! I can fight more!
With Evolve's release date pushed back until February 2015, it's still quite a while until we can have a full-on bash at this monster mash, but the feedback from fans after their hands-on at this year's EGX was generally very positive. If you attended the show and managed to have a go at the Goliath or a crack at the Kraken, let us know how you found the game in the comments below, and as always, a little like on the video goes a long way, and a subscribe to the channel goes even further, because then you'll see more stuff like this, and other stuff that's not quite like this, but just as good. Which is lovely. Goodbye!